Hey everybody, Jeremy and Jimmy here from Carcass. We're outside of the shop today and we want to talk to you about paint and bodywork and pretty much exactly what it took to get our 78 Datsun into this shape it is right now.
But before we do that, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.
So let's just dive into it. When we purchased the 78 Datsun here, it was a baby blue color. The car actually had been restored before we got our hands on it, but we wanted to do so many different changes to it. One of those things being the color that we chose. Now, when you're driving down the street, the first thing that mainly everybody sees is what color your car is, especially in like the hot rod and the street rod scene when you see all these cars driving up and down. Loud colors or kind of exotic or odd colors really seem to be making a splash. So the Boulder Gray, which is actually a Nissan color, and the color that we chose for this car kind of just does that. The biggest thing you see here with this is the fact that the car is actually shiny, but the paint that's underneath it is a dull color. It doesn't have a lot of flake, it doesn't have any metallic in it, actually doesn't have any flake in it either. It's just a base solid color. And I've really fallen in love with this car and this color just solely because of that. It's very simple to look at, not very simple to lay down, solely because as you choose your patterns and how you spray, you gotta make sure that your overlaps and everything are correct to make sure that the color lays down perfectly. Now, with this car, we had somewhat of a challenge. We took it a lot further than we normally do all of our other race cars that we build. This one we actually pulled down almost completely to nothing, did a ton of body work and a lot of body mods on this, but it turned out great. It turned out really slick. I mean, I guess the main question here is, how do you get that car from the baby blue that it was, it was straight, and how do we do a complete color change? And that started with a lot of work around the outside of the car.
Speaking of body mods, there were a ton of things that we did to this car to make it unique. Of course, this is a 280Z, but at this point it looks more like a 240Z if you guys are familiar with those cars. And some of the things that make this stand out a little bit is originally this car had those crash bumpers on it because this was in the mid-70s and all cars were required to have them. So in the back, there were these big kind of stanchions that held the rear bumper up there. And so what we did, we took those out, but there were two giant holes in the back, so we had to patch those and fill them in to give the back a nice smooth look. Some other things moving forward on the car, it originally had your typical door mirror, but this being a JDM inspired build, we wanted to put them up on the fenders like you would see on one of these cars over in Japan. And then also just giving the car an overall kind of aggressive stance, we put these flares on it, and to do so, we had to do quite a bit of work to the back. The front was easier, but in the rear, we had to cut into the fender arch and kind of open it up. And because of that, we had to actually weld back together the inner fender structure and the outer skin to make it one piece again. And on the front, it was as simple as just widening that arch, getting everything opened up to clear the bigger wheels and tires, and then putting the flare on it. And the last modification that we did to put our own flare on it was to get rid of the marker lights to give the side just a nice smooth look. And to do that, we just patched in some steel and then did the body work, which in and of itself is a huge challenge.
So with bodywork comes the old adage, you get out of it what you put into it, and that is truly the case. The more time you spend on something, the better finish you're gonna have, especially when it comes to doing bodywork. In the back here, we kind of had one of the challenges. We had the marker light that sat somewhere in here, and then as you weld, that puts a lot of heat into the metal and it can actually kind of distort it. So that had happened, that it kind of moved that distortion up into this body line. It's pretty subtle right now, but this body line got kind of, you could say, screwed up. So we had somewhat of a challenge to try to straighten that out the best we can with a hammer and dolly, but then it came back to doing it with a little bit of body filler. Now, a trick that I like to do to help me keep body lines straight, especially if you have to do a little bit of work to them, is you can actually take a piece of tape or a pencil and mark a visual line on where you want that to be, so you can stand back and make sure it looks straight and fits the car. And then from there, you can start sanding right up to the line. You can sand down, and you can come on top of the line and you can sand up. And then you can make this line perfectly straight. And then at the very end of that, you can come back and kind of soften the line up so it kind of matches the rest of the car. So once you've got all your body work done, then you have the giant task of figuring out what color do you want to paint it, because that can make or break the way a car looks too. So now it's on to color choice. And for our Datsun, we were working very closely with Nissan Corporate, and they were coming out with the New Z at the time. And one of the colors that you could get on the New Z was this color gray. It's called the Boulder Gray. And probably one of the things that you guys notice right away is the fact that it almost looks like a primer gray. It's a very flat color, but it is shiny, and that's because we have clear coat over the top of it. The Boulder Gray itself has no metallics in it. It is just a base flat gray color. And then obviously on top of that, we did put the clear coat to give it that shininess to it. But even before we laid down any type of color on the outside of the car, we had a lot of work to do in certain spots kind of inside the car.
Now, when you paint a car, there's kind of two different levels that you can take it to. The first one being the most simple is you can just paint the exterior, or the second level is you can paint the exterior, including all the jambs, the engine bay, under the hood, the deck lid, and everything. And that's what we chose to do with this car. It's quite a bit more work, but we felt like it was worth it. So what we had to do here was painting the underside of the hood. We obviously had to take it off. Deck lid, the same thing to get the underside of the jambs. And then we also wanted to paint the door jambs. And luckily for us, there's nothing on the upper frame of the door that had to be painted. So what Jeremy was able to do when he did paint it, it's a little bit tricky, but basically he would spray whatever he needed to on the outside, and then he would use his pinky to open the door, spray the jamb. Of course, we had this big opening all masked off, and then he would gently kind of close this, not all the way, so the surfaces didn't risk touching each other. And then he would just go through that process for as many coats as he put on the car. And there are a few things that Jeremy and I wanted to do to take it a step further. And under the hood, there are a few stickers that came stock on this car, and we wanted to preserve those. So we masked over them. Once we painted it, peeled the masking off, and they remain in perfect shape. And so obviously painting the engine bay and matching the outside, painting the jambs, preserving the stickers and everything like that, it takes a lot more work, but as we all know, the details matter.
So with that all said and done, it was time to move on to final assembly. Now, one big thing that we do when we build cars out is every time that we put a part or piece on the car, we assemble it completely to make sure that, especially once we're in paint, we don't have to drill any new holes and expose any of that bare metal. So with all of our parts and pieces on the car, we were pretty happy with the way that it looked like, but there's one thing that can really make or break a car, and that's your choice in wheels and tires. So we went with a set of 17 by 9.5 in the front and the rear with a very specific offset that just kind of let the wheels stick out just a little bit from the car, but yet still be covered up by the fender flares. Now, we think that gave the car a perfect look, and we're really happy with the way that it turned out.
I can definitely say that this thing matches our vision perfectly. And looking back at all the work that we did, I can also say that it was worth it.
Yeah, this is the nicest car I've ever built. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for us. So make sure you guys check out PowerNation for our exclusive content, and definitely check out our full builds like our 78 280Z.